Welcome to the Family Bonuses Reforged tier list. We're going to be breaking down all of these different family bonuses and their attribute list as well, giving you the ranking S, A, B, C, D, and placing each of these in their respective ranking. This will be broke down by class, so that way you can have more specialized information or rating based upon each one of your individual classes. And I will put timestamps down below to make it easier and quicker for you in order to save your time. You can skip straight to your class. With that being said, consider liking or subscribing for the more high effort. Love you all. Let's get going on the video. We are first going to start with the Barbarian because that is the class I'm currently playing. And we will go down the list starting from the top. So the Wildfire set family bonus is one thing in particular, and that is stacked with attribute abilities that are quite good. We have primary attack damage, all skill damage. We have critical hit damage. Now this makes this set decently appealing to get a Hydra bonus, because if you take a look here, what that actually ends up doing is you have a 2% chance when you defeat an enemy to summon a fireball spitting Hydra. It can be tempting just to take the Hydra because these attributes are so good itself. Here's the thing though, the Hydra proc itself only happens after you defeat an enemy. So actually getting this Hydra to show up is rarer than you think. I actually think that the Wildfire set is not as good as if we were looking in the Ancestral Tableau, and instead we were taking one of the bonuses that would give us, if we look here, you can see that you can actually switch your bonuses out, and there's different ones that will actually give, for instance, like summoning a Hydra. No one's got one up here right now, but I think it's actually better if you're trying to do the Hydra to have it get summoned out of your Ancestral Tableau, as it's easier than just having the 2% chance of summoning one from getting an actual kill. So if you're asking me for Barbarian in particular, it's hard for me to really like the Hydra a super high amount. And I did use the Hydra pretty significantly. I had 3 stacks of the Hydra. The only thing I really like from it's the primary attack damage, the attributes, etc. And for that reason, I think I'm going to be placing the Hydra at a B, which is about as generous as I can be. Now, the Trimmer, I think, is actually quite good because instead of it being a 2% chance every kill, it's a 2% chance every primary attack. And obviously, we're going to get more primary attacks per kill than we're going to get deaths per kill, right? So this Trimmer has a much higher chance to actually proc. What it actually does, too, is it inflicts 11,429 damage. Obviously, the green numbers will change depending upon your stats, but this also does a stun. And the good thing about this one is these attributes have a couple decent primary attack bonuses. So, for instance, reducing enemy healing, which actually can be useful in PvP to some regard, a chance to slow the enemy attack and movement speed, and then the stun resistance can be kind of all right as well. Personally, I think the Trimmer is better at one thing, which is making sure that you can proc your Chip of the Stone Flesh. Chip of the Stone Flesh procs off of total loss of control, and the Trimmer stun does actually count as total loss of control. So if you're using a Chip of the Stone Flesh, it actually does work, and because of the AoE effect on it, it can also proc things like Seeping Bile, etc. So I don't think it's that bad. I think it's quite good on primary attack-based people like the Barbarian. I think personally, this would be an A or S tier for me. I think I'm going to put it in the A tier for now. Now, Jode's pretty interesting, and again, we're doing these class specific. So for a Barbarian, I actually think Jode can be quite good for a number of reasons. First of all, it's when you attack, you have a chance to immobilize your attackers, which in PvP can be pretty good because you're normally the one getting attacked and focused down. Namely, you have Undying Rage, etc., right? But if you actually look at what you get on the attribute list, damage taken from players reduced, again, great in PvP, cheat death, again, and then look at this, duration of beneficial effects increased. Okay, so you can roll that one, and you can even roll the damage taken while suffering loss of control as well, because very often when you're getting focused down and you're trying to proc your Jode set, etc., or you have Undying Rage going on, you'll reduce the amount of damage you're taking while you're getting total loss of control, etc. So I actually think that if you're doing PvP builds, the Jode set can be quite good on the Barbarian. So for me, I'm actually going to put that at S tier because I think it's one of the better sets, not only because of the active, but because of the attributes. In particular for PvP is why it's going to be carried. In PvP or in PvE, it's not really as important unless you're just trying to min-max your beneficial effect duration. And the reason it gets S tier also is because part of the attributes are so good. And beneficial effect is amazing because some of your primary moves in PvP and PvE are things like Wrath of the Berserker, which gets increased with beneficial effect duration. And check this out, the Undying Rage actually gets increased with beneficial effect duration as well. And some people don't know this, but beneficial effect duration actually has 0 cap on it. from what we understand. I actually got that information from FO Elite, another YouTuber, so shout out to him. That's where I saw that. So for that reason, stacking beneficial effect duration is actually quite good, in particular on the Barbarian. Now, Vengeance set, I'm probably going to be giving the same logic to just across the board on all characters. Vengeance set is, look at this, primary attacks, 2% chance to increase all damage you deal by 100%. This is basically something, if you're just trying to max out your overall damage per second, like min-max your total damage either in the dungeon while you were there the whole time or your total damage in an entire battleground, etc. Vengeance will give you the most increased damage because you can get the 100% for 1 second down to an 18-second cooldown if you stack all of them. Also, the other thing is, look, attack speed increase, damage done to players increase, and then you have damage done to demons, damage done to enemies suffering loss of control. Obviously, loss of control players and attack speed can be a triple build that's pretty decent for PvP. A lot of times you don't run Vengeance in PvP, mostly because you have to primary attack people that have a chance to increase damage, and a lot of your damage is coming from things like charging and etc. So for that reason, this is more of a PvE type of thing, but because of the massive increase of damage, I mean, you can get 5-6% here, attack speed increase, it's one of the sets, and primarily because of the 100% damage too. Also, the highest crit I've ever done was because of this proc. It will basically double your damage temporarily. For this reason, I want to put it in S tier as something that if you're trying to PvE, just stack like a frenzy type of build, it's actually like S tier in terms of a set bonuses. I don't like the attributes as much. I would prefer things like critical hit damage, just primary attack damage increase as well, but it's going to be more useful in overall damage than things like Tremor set, whereas the Tremor set is going to be better for things like overworld farming because it's an AoE that will instantly kind of delete people in AoE. This one's going to be better for things like you're doing your warband raids, you are in the dungeon, etc., and you're trying to farm down the boss. That's where you're going to get more damage out of that. It's not so much going to help you with the overworld farming because a lot of times by the time this procs, you're going to have already killed that mob. But I do think that Vengeance is quite strong, and it's probably going to maintain an S tier just because of the 100% damage increase on most of these characters. The one caveat I'll say, because I am debating putting it like an A tier for most people, but I'm just going to maintain it in the S tier, I think. One caveat to this is, like I was saying, the attribute list isn't as strong as some of these other attribute lists that you can get, like the beneficial effect, duration increase, etc. as we get through some of these. It can't really compete with things like primary attack damage and just overall really good stats, but it is a really good set bonus, which is why I like it for PvE. Now, barrier set can be really good, I think, on the Barbarian, and I would be tempted to put this in S tier because it has a 2% chance when attacked to gain absorption shield, and in PvP, from what I understand, this can be really strong and basically scales with resonance, scales with being a well, etc. I've learned this from some of the better Barbarians in my server. However, there's one problem with it, which is the attribute list is quite bad, so I can't put it in S tier because you got like maximum life increase, which is great, but things like damage to undead increase, damage taken from nearby enemies decrease, block chance increase, fear resistance increase. Like, I don't want any of these stats typically, and so for me, I think barrier, if we're talking PvP, would be probably an A tier. If we're talking PvP, maybe S tier. But because we're talking all things, and I think it's just like legitimately bad in PvE, I'm probably going to put it in B tier at the moment. I would rather have Tremor or Jolt than Barrier. But if you're a well and you're focusing on PvP entirely, then it gets bumped up to A tier. But without that caveat and trying to be fair, I think it's more of a B tier. Now, Ravager is just a bummer of a one because we have two spots in it here that will give you damage taken or damage increased by summons. So this is obviously already targeting the Necromancer, but then it has really bad ones like healing potion cooldown and life regeneration increased by 1 or 2%. When was the last time you sat around just waiting for your life just to regenerate? Like, there's a lot of really stupid things on this here. Like, damage to elite enemies goes up to 6%. Like, why would I want damage only to elite enemies to go up 6% when I could pick literally like damage done to enemies below 30%, life increase, primary attack increase, all skill damage, critical damage, like almost anything else. The thing about the set bonus is 2% chance when you defeat an enemy that causes the corpse to explode, damaging all nearby enemies. And they don't mean corpse like it has to drop a corpse from Necromancer. This is a separate corpse, by the way. So this 2% chance, again, my problem with this type of thing is very often when you're killing packs of mobs, they either all die at the same time, or they only have a little bit of life left and they're bleeding, etc. I don't really need the corpse of like one person to blow up in order to blow up another one. Like chain reactions don't really happen. 2% on 2% is way too rare. So I'm just not really a massive fan of the Ravager set overall. And in particular, I'm not a fan of it for Barbarian. So it's actually going to go in the D tier right there. So this is somewhat what the list is going to look like, including the fact that the attributes, not just the family set bonuses, are being included within our rating. And now we're going to move on to Necromancer. It is the one I feel I know probably the best of all the ones on this list. Now, looking at the family bonuses, there's a lot of family bonuses that will work for the Necromancer. The Wildfire set is the one we're going to be starting with here. Obviously, the attribute list is quite good. We have primary attack damage, skill damage, damage done to enemies below 30% health, critical hit damage, etc. All stuff you like to see, all damage related. The 2% chance when you defeat an enemy summons a fireball spitting Hydra. This is very thematic in line with the Necromancer, where you're wanting to do summons, you're kind of wanting to run in a circle and leave your summons behind you, which will kill the mobs as you continue to run and set up more summons. You're almost setting up like turrets in a circle, sort of, and this kind of fits that theme. The Hydra very often can actually tank for you too, so if you actually have the Hydra get summoned in things like Challenge Rifts or in the overworld, minions will clump together, making your other minions very easy to attack it, because they very often like to focus down that Hydra, and your other minions will have a clear shot to kind of nuke them, etc. So I use the Wildfire set quite a bit on the Necromancer, actually, because it fills a different row with the Necromancer than it does almost any other class, because a lot of times the other classes, I'm killing the pack myself real quick, as quickly as I can, then moving on the next pack. The Necro, I'm running past all the packs and setting up summons behind me that kind of kill them in a line as they're following me, namely the mages. And the Hydra fits perfectly with that concept, where every now and then we'll spawn a Hydra behind me that will help kill the minions, and it doesn't really matter how far it spawns behind me, because we're just running the circle over and over and over again anyway. So I actually really like the Wildfire set. It is basically completely worthless in PvP. However, in PvE, it's quite good, and in the attribute list, it's quite good as well. Necromancer, it will be an S tier for me on the Wildfire. I'm not saying it's absolutely amazing, nor maybe the best one in particular, but on Necromancer, this is going to be maybe the only spot where I really give Wildfire a S tier, as you can actually kind of use the summons on the Necro. Now, Tremor is just quite good on everyone. Primary attacks, having the AoE and having the stun is great. Your primary attacks, reducing the enemy attack and movement speed, can be pretty good too, because considering that the Necromancer doesn't really have these slows, unless you have a legendary gem or something that's applying chill like the Frozen Heart, you're not really having a whole bunch of slows in your full PvE summon type of build. You're normally just nuking people down. So having a slow on your basic can be pretty good. The other ones aren't really that beneficial in my own personal opinion, but the AoE of the stun, the fact that the AoE stun triggers Chip of the Stone Flesh that you can use as well. So you do some primary attacks, you get an AoE, you stun the people around you, you put your Molten Golem down, you knock them up, you keep moving. The problem with this is the Tremor set procs off of where you are, and the Necromancer is one of many ranged classes, so in order to utilize this 100%, it's not utilized as good as the melee classes. However, just because it's quite good, it triggers Chip of the Stone, Flesh, etc., it's going to be hard for me not to want to put this in A tier for the purposes of this video. Now, the Jolt set isn't going to be as good as it will be on melee classes for the same logic of Tremor, it being ranged. However, it does have quite good attribute list. The duration of beneficial effects going up to 3%, considering you can put this on all 6 pieces, that's 18%, can increase your Wraith form time significantly, which will help in things like PvP. Primarily PvP. It'll also help with like the Corpse Lance build, where you're stacking corpses with Gallowsborn, etc., for a bigger nuke. Duration beneficial effect will help with your bone armor, your parting gifts. It's quite good, okay? You can even get an uncapped amount of beneficial effects. So combined with things like Blessing Pebble, etc., you can basically get your completely immune to damage bone armor uptime 100%. Then you have the shoulders to make it immune to knockback too. And now you have 100% of the time you're immune to damage and immune to CC. Does that sound broken? Maybe it does a little bit. So I really like increase the duration of beneficial effects. That's always going to be carrying the Jolt set. However, because it immobilizes attackers, I think it's better on melee than it is on a, for instance, a ranged character. So I'm not going to give it the S tier, for instance, like I would on the Barbarian, but I do think that it's A tier. It's not only the duration of beneficial effects, it can be quite good on this as well, but damage taken from players is reduced. Obviously, that's good in PvP. Damage taken suffering loss of control. PvP, once again, even cheat death was nerfed recently because it was pretty good for a while. So all that being said, the Jolt set effect gets carried by its attribute list and the decent usability of immobilizing attackers in PvP scenarios. Okay, next on the list is Vengeance. Primary attacks have a chance to increase all damage you deal by 100% for 1 second. Here's the thing about this. This actually increases your summon damage too, I believe. The reason I say this is because I had a clip on Twitch of me hitting like 170k or something from like a golem throw, and I was like, what just happened? Because there's certain abilities, for instance, like jumping your golem onto somebody. I believe that it actually counts as like active damage you're dealing that gets increased. So I've had massive spikes of damage in DPS from primary attacking while I have summons up. And so for that reason, if you're trying to get as much damage as you possibly can, I would take Vengeance. The only problem with it is it's really only a PvE thing because it increases attack speed, damage to players is increased, but then it's damage to demons, enemies suffering loss of control, and shielded enemies. So it is kind of a yin-yang of like not that great of attributes, and you kind of have to take damage to like demons or attack speed or shielded enemies or something kind of whack in order to be able to get the stacking of your primary attacks. The one other thing is this would not have been as good, in my personal opinion, when it was still 80 seconds, but Vengeance is most best when utilized on every single piece of gear, and you stack 6 of them, bringing the cooldown down to 18 seconds. So because of that, you can have your damage uptime theoretically be like, what would that be, like 5 and something percent, 6% of the total time. You can basically be dealing double damage, which I think is going to be a significant increase in DPS over the lifespan of your character. And so if you're trying to just get min-max your damage, then it's going to be Vengeance. It's not mind-blowing, but I think it's better than some of the other ones that are going to be in the A tier list today. Barrier, I more or less just hate on most characters, to be honest. It's better on melee. Damage done to undead, I don't want. Damage taken from nearby enemies, I don't want. I'm a ranged character. Block chance, fear increase, I don't want any of that. The only thing I want is maybe maximum life, and the occasional shield would be nice, but again, we're ranged and we're Necromancer, so we're having summons that are coming up behind us when we're pushing, etc., which is taking most of the damage, or they're getting nuked. I don't really want this barrier set shield. So for me, this just is not really, there's not too much to debate about it. It's just not good. It's like C tier at best. Now, Ravager is actually really interesting because when you defeat an enemy, you have the chance for corpses to explode. And Necromancers do actually kind of work around after defeating enemies, because if you're using the Hydra, for instance, then that's based upon defeating enemies, and maybe you want to mix that with the Ravager. So when you defeat something, you have an opportunity for a burst of damage, and you can use like other corpse explosions, corpse lances, etc. There's an argument to be made the Ravager is decent. I don't really like the set effect as much as I like what comes with it. Sorry on the timer, which would be things like damage taken by your summons decreased, damage by your summons increased, and then the other ones are more or less garbage. If I had to pick, I'd pick the bottom 3 for the damage increase, but you can increase your summon damage. It's one of the only things that will allow you to do this, considering that you can get 4%, and you can stack it on each one of your pieces. That is a 24% increase at max rows for summon damage, which is bigger than even set bonuses. So for that reason, you could min-max your Necromancer's damage significantly with this set, and for that reason in particular, even though I'm not really a huge fan of Ravager, it's probably S tier only for the attributes, because it will allow you to get a 24% an increase in summon damage. Okay, solely for that reason. And then if we include the bonuses, it's probably like A tier for me. But if we put this one here, then it probably would look more like this. There's an argument to be made we could swap these, okay? So this is the final list, and depending upon how you feel about it, you could swap either one of these, and depending upon your build, okay? Probably a more fair evaluation is something like that, purely because Vengeance is just solid all the way around for pure DPS, but there's an argument to be made for either one of these to be in the S tier. So we'll just leave it like this for the moment. That wraps up Necromancer. All right, we talked about Necromancer. Let's talk about the Wizard next. Another intelligence-based class, Wildfire set. Once again, Fireball Spitting Hydra. Again, the attribute list is quite good. All of these are good. This will be considered when we give it its final rating. When it comes to what we're actually looking for the Wizard, we're looking for ultimate DPS. That's primarily what we're looking for, and we don't really utilize our primary attacks as much on the Wizard because we're using a lot of beams, a lot of moving around, meteorite, firestorm, stuff like that, right? So for this reason, I would value DPS not associated with primary attacks a little bit more than I standardly would, meaning maybe I like the Wildfire set a little bit. Because of the attribute list, considering its critical hit damage, which we have the Firestorm, which procs the orange critical hit damage. I like having this quite a bit. I love the skill damage. As skills are primarily where most of our damage come from, as opposed to like Demon Hunter, Barbarian, etc., where you know a lot of it is primary attack damage. And so for this reason, this set is quite good on the Wizard, I believe. I think the Wizard is maybe one of the classes that doesn't need set bonuses as much, but we'll talk about Vengeance, etc. when we get there. So maybe what they want to do is min-max things like having the correct attributes like critical hit damage, maybe skill damage, and then going somewhere else and picking up something else like duration of beneficial effects or whatever they really feel like in order to min-max their damage entirely. There's an argument to be made for attack speed, etc. So with all of that being said, if they are going for a full set bonus at this point as a Wizard, I do think the Hydra is one of the better ones for the reasons stated. I'm probably going to end up giving it, I'll put it in the A tier to start for today. Moving on to Trimmer. How do I feel about Trimmer? I feel about Trimmer the same way I feel about most range classes on Trimmer, which is the fact that primary attacks being able to do something in addition is always nice. I don't find it necessarily as important on the Wizard because you're not going to be using your primary attacks as much, and for that reason it's devalued a little bit. The continual damage taken, stun resistance, knockback resistance is all right, but the concept for that would mostly be in PvP I really care about, like stun resistance, knockback resistance, etc., which just really isn't going to happen because realistically, if I'm getting myself in a position to constantly get stunned, etc., as a Wizard who has like the longest range in the game, I'm either mispositioning or they're dominating us and being able to get us under the back line, etc. And so for that reason, this isn't really going to change any of that. So it's hard for me to like Trimmer for anything other than what its set bonus is, which means primary attacks, 2% chance to inflict your damage and stun. Love the stun because it procs Chip of the Stone Flesh, allows me to stun somebody and then melt them down with the beam, etc., firestorm them, whatever it may be. I'm all for that, but for the reasons stated, I think Trimmer at best currently is going to be A or B tier. I couldn't put it in the S tier, and because Trimmer I actually probably prefer Wildfire, I actually think I'm going to put it in the B tier for now, which is our first placement of Trimmer in the B tier. If it was any other class, the primary attack activation is set with the AoE stun is so good that it would carry it, but for now we're going to leave it in the B tier. Unless you really want a bunch of stun, you're doing like a stun freeze type of build, which is the thing on the mage, you could go A tier, otherwise it is B tier. Now, Jolt is pretty much always going to be good on everybody because the attributes can be quite good, but I don't think duration of beneficial effects is as amazing on a Wizard as it is on other characters. There is like the invisibility with the teleport. There's a few things that come to mind, but it's not necessarily 100% as effective as it, like on the Demon Hunter or the Barbarian, for instance. So for that reason, the Jolt set isn't going to get as high rankings from me personally. Also, taking damage while suffering loss of control, damage taken from players, these are all good in PvP scenarios, but I've kind of broken down why if you're getting jumped on and CC'd over and over again as a Wizard, it's kind of a problem for other reasons other than just you need these stats. So for that reason, Jolt doesn't get as high of a ranking for me. Has a chance to immobilize your attackers. You're ranged once again, so if you're immobilizing melee, it might help you get away long enough to like teleport away while they're immobilized. I could see that being somewhat useful. As it stands though, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm mostly looking for DPS. So for today, if I'm going to be talking about the Jolt set, I think I'm going to put the Jolt set in B because I think it's as good as Trimmer. It's not total trash. It's not super completely amazing, and nothing's in S tier yet because none of these really like hyper synergize with what the Wizard needs, for instance. It doesn't really have a Reforge bonus that's just so good. I would say that the Vengeance set is that really, really good and would be the optimal, in my personal opinion, set if instead of primary attacks, it's when you deal damage, you add the 2%, because you're dealing damage all the time with burns, firestorm, damage over time, continual damage, stuff on the floor, blizzard, all these different things. You're doing lots of instances of continuous damage. So if that's what Vengeance set was, then it would be absolutely god tier. But because it's based upon primary attack, and because very often you teleport in, especially in PvP, you teleport in, drop down your crystal, you're nuking people around you, or you're using the beam, etc. You're never really like attacking them first with a primary attack and then doing it. This only really does something on bosses while you're in between cooldowns. So if you're using your laser beam and you run out disintegrate, you run out all your other stuff's on cooldown, your meteorite, all that, then you're basic attacking, and then you get the Vengeance proc and you have 1 second, then you start your laser beam up again for that second. That's really when it's utilized, but there's so many like what ifs in order to get there that I can't put it at S tier, but because attack speed, which does work on channeling, and you're using beams, so it's going to get your damage out a little bit quicker. Damage to players, which is a top tier stat for the wizard, because all you're trying to do is nuke players. You're not trying to stay alive like the barbarian, etc. Damage to demons, enemies suffering loss of control, which actually the damage to enemies suffering loss of control is even better on the wizard than it is on most classes, because you're doing continual damage with the Ray of Frost, which freezes people if you have a certain helmet after 6 stacks, which suffers loss of control, and then your damage is ramping on that, etc. So it's actually one of the better classes, and in my personal opinion is A tier, arguably S tier because of the attributes, but we're going to leave it on A tier because it's fairly comparable with the attribute list off the Hydra, and the Hydra is arguably as good, if not slightly better than the Vengeance because of the reasons I stated about the primary attack. Barrier is just bad on the wizard. I don't want to see a barrier set on a wizard in particular. A chance to have an absorb shield's like kind of cool, I guess, but maximum life, block chance, fear, resistance, like all these things. I don't want any of these things on my wizard in particular where I'm trying to deal damage, and I don't think they're going to help me if someone's trying to deal damage to me for the most part, unless I'm doing some troll like full mount bake set, plus this, plus whatever shield items I have, etc. Just not a fan of the barrier set literally at all. It's probably D tier, to be honest. I'm going to put it in D tier. The Ravager set isn't as bad as you might think because the damage done by your summons can actually do something. The wizard does have a summon. It's a chest plate that what you do is you leave this guy that is a summon that costs the Ray of Frost beam, and he counts as a summon from my understanding, so it actually can have your damage increased. And damage to elite enemies can be all right because you have teleport. So in things like challenge rifts, a viable strategy for people that are highly mobile like the wizard is you just teleport to elite packs, kill the elite pack, farm the rift progressions, and then move on. Okay, and so that is something you could actually do, and that could be a viable PvE build because you can get up to 6%, etc. And the chance when you're defeating enemies to cause them to explode can actually be better on wizard than on most classes because you're doing so much incremental smaller damage with like the beam, the continuous damage, etc. Things are dying more off-centered. So you have like one blow up, then one right after, then one right after more often, which means the Ravager set can be slightly better, even though it's like a tiny bit better than normal. So for that reason, it's not going to be as good as some of the other ones, but it's not as bad as instance as the barrier set. So this is where we are on our list. Nothing quite made it to the S tier. There's an argument that maybe we could put that there. Maybe you could put that there. Probably looks more like that, but right here on the wizard, I just feel like the wizard gets a little bit boned because the primary attack's not as good. It doesn't have as many really top tier Reforge bonuses that synergize super well with it. There's nothing really focusing channeling or continuous damage or any of the things the wizard's really about. And so for that reason, everything's good but not great. Okay, let's talk about Demon Hunter. Demon Hunter is going to be one of the more fun ones. Starting with the Wildfire set, the attribute list, primary attack damage is one of, if not the best attribute that you can have in particular from a Demon Hunter. The Demon Hunter has the best argument out of all the classes to have absolutely no family set bonuses and actually break it apart in order to min-max the secondary bonuses like the attribute list. So what I'm talking about is, for instance, on the Demon Hunter, taking primary attack bonus, plus taking the attack speed bonus, plus then going to Jolt and taking the duration of beneficial effect increase can be the best 3 to take instead of taking any of your sets. The reason is because the best build in the game for this is a vengeance-based attack based build for the Demon Hunter. So attack speed helps with primary attack damage obviously helps with primary attack, and then increasing the duration of the beneficial effect, which is Vengeance, increases how much damage you're dealing with those primary attacks over time, basically, and reduces the cooldown between the Vengeance. That's why people use like a Vithus 4-piece, because you're trying to stack attack speed, primary attack, etc. So you can run that style of build on the Demon Hunter. However, because we're going to be talking about the family bonuses and their sets in the entirety for the sake of this video, the Wildfire set is fairly decent. I don't mind it. I think it's going to be in the A tier because of how good the attribute list is. It's arguable it's in the S tier for that reason, but because this is a heavily basic attack influence character, in fact, almost entirely basic attack, it's only going to be the A tier. Now, moving on to the Trimmer set, this is a primary attack-based set, has a chance to inflict an AoE stun. Demon Hunter is weak on CC, so it does need this type of stun. The basics actually reduce enemy healing or a chance to reduce their attack and movement speed. Because it does both attack speed and movement speed, it can be pretty good in PvP, can be pretty good in PvE, helps things like challenge rifts. It's almost like having a chill on your basic attack. For that reason, I actually think it's quite good. And you are ranged, which is a bummer, and the Trimmer procs off you, not off the minions, so trying to actually stun people with this is a little bit more like melee man mode, but because it is off of the basic attack, and this character is heavily basic attack influence and really needs the CC and doesn't have many ways to proc things like Chip of the Stone Flesh, the Trimmer set is actually like top tier for the Demon Hunter. I'm going to put it in S tier for me today. Now, moving on to the Jote set. When you're attacked, you have a chance to immobilize your attackers. There's only one thing you need to know about this family bonus, which is the duration of beneficial effects. Damage taken from players reduced is great if you're doing PvP, and all these other things are great, but the entirety of why we're going to like this family bonus is because of the duration of beneficial effects, okay? There is no cap on this. You can get Vengeance to go up as long as possible if you have more and more beneficial effects, stacks with things like the Blessed Pebble, and actually having Vengeance is what is going to proc the majority of like your spam primary attack damage paired with things like Vithus, etc., because it counts as a buff. And there's all of these amazing combinations that happen as you start to increase your beneficial effect duration, and the goal is to have Vengeance up as long as possible, so it's really, really, really good. The actual effect, we don't really care about that much. Again, we're ranged. If somebody's focusing us, it's a problem literally already. Damage taken from players is great. Cheat death, all these other things is fine, like we've talked about before, but just because of the duration of beneficial effects, it's so good, it carries everything else about it, and it's A tier strictly because you really want that duration of beneficial effects. There's an argument to be made. You could just you could use no set bonuses purely for the duration of the beneficial effect because it is so good currently on the Demon Hunter. I know it sounds like I'm kind of hyping it up a little bit just to make the set good, but it's not the set that's good. It's literally just that attribute, and that it's that important on the Demon Hunter. Now, the Vengeance set is one that I love for this, because your primary attack's 2% chance to increase all damage by 100%, but you are attacking faster than any other class in the game. So that 2% chance comes more often than you would think. And if you do a full set of this, that means you're going to have attack speed, that means you're going to have damage done to players, and maybe damage done to people suffering loss of control or shielded enemies. So your burst is going to be higher on PvP players if they have like a shield, etc. And then your burst on those people that are getting CC'd, maybe you have like one Trimmer proc, so you stun somebody, Chip of the Stone Flesh, etc. Then you have 5 Vengeances, etc. But because you can get the cooldown of this to 18 seconds, it lasts for 1 second, that's a good amount of uptime to have 100% increased damage for all your primary attacks. So you love to see that, okay? Very, very top tier in my personal opinion. The Vengeance is one of the better ones. It's going to be S tier for me. I think it's probably better than Trimmer. Okay, so moving on here. Barrier set I don't like at all. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not trying to tank anything as a Demon Hunter. I'm trying to kite them. If you actually look here, damage done to undead, maximum life, all these things. I don't care about any of this, maybe maximum life. The rest I don't think is very good for the Demon Hunter. Doesn't make sense for the build. This is a really bad set bonus and bad attributes. So it's going to go D tier. Don't think it makes any sense to run this type of build. So moving on here towards the Ravager set now. 2% chance when you defeat an enemy that causes the corpse to explode. This can be kind of nice for overworld farming, etc. Now, damage done by summons increased, damage taken by summons decreased. Don't like any of that, but especially because the sentry turret's not very good on the demon hunters, so I'm not exactly interested in doing any kind of summon build. Healing potion cooldown reduced by 1 or 2% is a literal meme, so I'm not really interested in any of the things offered here. This is once again going to go on a list that I don't like, but purely because I like the exploding bodies more than I like the shield, I'm going to say it's better than this one, so it deserves one spot up on the tier list. But that's basically how it's going to look. This one could almost be here strictly because the duration of beneficial effects is so good. And if we're not counting, if we're taking away the set bonuses, then it's like this, actually, if we're only talking about the attribute list. Otherwise, if we're including the actual set bonuses and the attribute list are both, kind of equally tied to how much we're rating them, it looks more like that. Let's talk about the Crusader. The Crusader is the PvE god, basically. I'm mostly going to be thinking about PvE, but there is some argument to be made for PvP scenarios as well that can be similar to the Barbarian when we start talking about it here. So let's start with the Wildfire set. 2% chance when you defeat an enemy summon Fireball Spitting Hydra basically is about the same for any class, except the Necro is a little different, but it does about the same thing for any class. So it's going to be okay, a little bit additional damage, good, not great. All right in overworld farming, maybe okay in challenge rifts for a little bit of tanking because the Hydra has a lot of HP for some reason. Other than that, there's not really like a whole bunch of beneficial effects. Healing party members on death is terrible, but the other ones are quite good. Damage done to enemies below 30% life is really good on a boss type of scenario, especially skill damage, again, boss type of scenario. And very often, Crusaders shine the most at bosses. So there is something to be said about the attribute list being decent synergy off of the Wildfire set for the Crusader. I think it's good, not great. I think it's A tier, mostly because of the attributes and because the Wildfire is going to give you a Hydra now and then, which will give you some damage. Not insane synergy with the Crusader, but not complete trash. Now, if we move on to the next one here, Trimmer. Trimmer makes a little bit more sense from the point of view in the Crusader, in my opinion. You have your primary attacks, which you will be using, have a 2% chance to inflict damage and stun nearby enemies. I feel like you're kind of a CC utility bot as a Crusader. You're giving more people more damage. You're giving CC immunity to damage, but you're also giving things like the Flaming Circle and some DPS and bosses as well. If you look at the basic attack here, primary attack reduces enemy healing, reduces their attack man movement speed, continual damage taken reduced, stun resistance, knockback resistance. All of these are okay. I'm not excited by any of these for the Crusader in particular. I would rather have that stun. You are melee based, so when you are playing a melee based character like Monk, Barbarian, Crusader, and this procs, it procs off of where you are, so it's better on melee than ranged characters because you're in the heart of the minions as opposed to like shooting them from a long range with a laser beam, with a wizard or something like that. So I do actually like Trimmer more on the Crusader than I do on, some other classes like the Necromancer, for instance. So I think for namely the stun alone is going to be the A tier. I think the stun is better than the Hydra, but the attributes are worse than the Hydra. So for that reason, they kind of end up tying each other on the list. So moving on here to Jolt. I think the Jolt can be pretty good in PvP. You have 2% chance when attacked to immobilize your attackers. I think this, again, can be quite good in Crusader because you are, again, melee, so you're in getting focused, damage taken from players reduced, and you can see duration of beneficial effects increased. This is going to be one of the more important things, is to increase the duration of beneficial effects, which can be quite nice. The reason you want this to be increased in particular is things like the Flame Circle, like these buffs that you give to your party members are beneficial effects, and you're going to want those beneficial effects to be increased as much as you possibly can because that is a large chunk of why you're good. And like the Flame Circle around you as well, I think it's called Judgment or something. I forget exactly which one it's called. I never actually was able to get that one on the Crusader, that essence. It missed me when I played Crusader. But I do know that's where the majority of their damage comes from, and increasing that would increase its damage as well, etc. So I do actually, I do quite like the Jolt set for the Crusader. I don't think it's amazing, but I don't think it's terrible. And because you're kind of being tanky and being in there and being utility support, etc. as it stands, then I think it's, I think it matches at least with the Hydra. It's better than the Hydra in PvP. Maybe not as good in PvE, but the duration of beneficial effects, etc., are as good, arguably. So, the Crusader's a little bit more of things are going to tie here. There's an argument to be made. Now, moving on to the Vengeance set. Primary attacks have a chance to increase all damage you deal. This can be some pretty hilarious damage, considering that you always have the Holy Banner with you. If you're using the Holy Banner, then you're always going to be critting more or less with the Crusader when it's up, and being able to have this trigger at the same time the Holy Banner goes off means your damage becomes quite insane for a short period of time. Damage to players increase and attack speed is okay, but it's not really like any better on the Crusader than it is on anyone else, and it's not as good as it would be like on things like the Demon Hunter, etc. And you have a lot of instant cast stuff that isn't really like a big channel that you really need the attack speed for or anything like that. So it's good, not great. And Vengeance is, in my opinion, it might actually be maybe worse than these ones, but I hate to put them all in the same rank here. If we put them all in the same rank, then it's like maybe I want to drop the Hydra down if I had to drop one of them, but the primary attack damage and the other ones, and damage below 30% on the boss, etc., can be quite good. So it's really, this one feels like the lamest one, where they all are kind of like okay. Like it's hard to really love any of these, in particular for the Crusader, because I don't really think it's kind of almost like the Wizard in a way, where like none of them really synergize too much with what the Crusader does. Barrier here, maximum life increase, block chance, fear resistance, all of these type of things are good, not great stats. I do like the maximum life increase, a pretty good amount, and the damage taken from nearby enemies reduced can be pretty good as well if you're going more tanky, and having a shield can be all right as well for the Crusader because you're melee based, so you're in there once again. But I think this is going to be the first one where I'm probably going to be dropping this in a rank below the other ones, because it doesn't have anything where I'm like, oh wow, I really want that, and it's arguable it could be like there, but I think B is probably more fair for this one. So now moving down the Ravager, when you have 2% chance to defeat enemies, cause a corpse to explode, damaging all nearby enemies. That's okay, considering you do have a pretty decent amount of AoE on the Crusader and continual damage. I could see an argument for this being quite good. If you look here, healing potion, life regeneration, damage to elite players, damage to summons, none of these make sense for the Crusader, and you're going to be wasting your time with these. So I would say do not take Ravager. In fact, because the attributes are just so trash, I think it's worse than Barrier in my particular opinion. So it looks something like this. Nothing really S tier again, to be honest, but because duration of beneficial effects is so good, we could put that up there. It could look something a little bit more like that, to be honest with you. But to be fair, Crusader is the class I have played the least, and my information would be the worst on the Crusader. The other ones I feel fairly confident about. This is one I'm not as confident about. Sorry to the Crusaders. So just to be fair, I've only got, a few dozen hours or something on the Crusader. I only played it for a week. Okay, we're going to talk about Monk next, because Monk is pretty exciting. So the Wildfire set is going to be good on Monk because primary attack damage is a good amount of the Monk's damage. Skill damage is obviously the rest of the Monk damage. Damage done to enemies below a certain percent of life is actually quite good on the Monk too, because you're typically assassinating people. You can jump around and jump on people that have lower health to get them quicker. And then heal party members for death is amazing because Monks always die because they're always suiciding in on PvP. I'm just joking. But critical hit damage is actually quite good as well. Okay, so you got to love those too. So in my personal opinion, Wildfire set is actually pretty good for the attributes, not necessarily amazing on the Monk. For if you're trying to use the completed set, it's kind of a 50-50, but primary attack is so important, skill damage is so important, and critical hit damage is so important on a DPS type of character, which is what the Monk is, that it is going to earn a spot in A tier, which is a very similar theme that you're going to be noticing. A lot of these characters are going to be having Hydra in A tier, primarily because it's being carried by the attribute list. Now, if we go to the trimmers here, primary attack with a stun, we're going to love this on the Monk, okay? Having more stuns, more forms of CC is amazing. It gives us more time to try to get in there and burst somebody out, etc. Particularly good in PvP. Having a way of slowing movement speed on the basic can be quite good, okay? Continual damage taken, reduced stun resistance, knockback resistance, etc. That's all right. Don't really love it, don't really hate it. The primary attack movement speed and attack speed reduction is fantastic, especially because you're very often getting the first hit because you're like teleporting in to hit somebody real quick with the basic, so you very often get that first. So I love that, and I love the stun. Okay, so I like all of that. Primarily the stun though, which will proc things like Chip of the Stone Flesh, etc. You have many stuns on the Monk. You have many different ways to stun people and CC them. This adds an additional way, which is very annoying in PvP. And I would rather have this set than the Hydra set, even though it would reduce my damage. I'd probably rather have the utility of the stun. So moving on here to the Jolt set, you have a chance to immobilize your attacker, which I think is actually pretty good on the monk because you are warping in and trying to burst somebody down, and then other people are going to be focusing you because you just warped in to hit the guy in the back line. And if you can immobilize those people and then get you a chance to run away, that's nice. The whole point of the monk is like go in, assassinate somebody, and then try to get away, and this kind of plays to that. Now, something about this increases the duration of beneficial effects, which we love. All right, that's quite good on the monk. I actually think cheat death is pretty good on the monk too, because there's a lot of times when you're about to hop away that you're going to eat like one arrow or something, and if you have that one time no whammies of like blocking that arrow, that can be pretty good. Damage taken from players reduced is good. Slow resistance is whatever, but damage taken while suffering loss of control, damage taken from players, cheat death, duration, beneficial effects, those are all quite good. I actually like Jolt for this reason. I don't think it's trimmer tier, but the attribute list carries it quite hard, just like the Hydra. So we're going to be right there on that one. Okay, so moving on to Vengeance. Vengeance is going to be nice because you do use primary attacks significantly, and increasing your damage, it will allow you to have more burst. It gives you the opportunity that sometimes when you're warping in and punching somebody is like your first move, suddenly you have 100% damage for the next second, and then they just get deleted in the next second. People that have been PvP and been nuked by wells know that 1 second is often long enough to just get deleted, and if that 1 second is double damage, oh boy, you're in for some trouble. Attack speed, damage to players, damage to demons, damage to people suffering loss of control, and damage to shielding enemies. These are all just DPS things. Monk is a DPS character. Don't love it, don't hate it. Do love the damage to players and attack speed, however. So that can be all right. For this reason, Vengeance is quite good in PvE. I think because it's primary attack, it's quite good as well in PvP. I like Vengeance. I think Vengeance is good on people that are using primary attacks and trying to deal with as much damage as possible, so I'm going to be giving it an S tier. Moving on to the Barrier. Getting a shield when you're attacked. Now, the problem with this is I hate all the ones on the attribute, which is damage to undead, hate it. Okay, maximum life increase, love it. Damage taken from nearby enemies decreased, don't really like that. Block chance, don't really like that. Fear resist, don't really like that. Now, there's an argument to be made that you could stack like fear resistance on 6 of these and 36% fear resistance or something. I've never seen fear resistance really do anything. Maybe it's something that PvP players would laugh at and be like, oh, you just got to stack the fear resistance, bro. You don't know what you're talking about. Maybe so. And if so, fine, I'm the idiot. But as it stands, I don't really like these attribute lists. I don't really like having the barrier shield. I think the shield can be good if you have more HP and you're well and you have lots of resonance, etc. It can stack and really scare some people. But if you're the average guy, don't really want to have a shield off of 2% chance. So that one is going to go there in B tier for that reason. Okay, so last one is Ravager, 2% chance when you defeat enemies cause corpse to explode. This is okay for overworld farming, rifts, etc. I hate the attribute list, which is healing potions, life regeneration. However, damage to elite enemies can be all right. Damage done by summons can actually be all right because you do have the mystic allies, and a lot of people use the echoing shade, etc. So there is an argument to be made for that. Mostly a Necromancer set, mostly don't like it. I do think it's pretty much as bad as this one, in my personal opinion. Probably worse. In fact, they probably both deserve to be something more like that. It could be either one of these. Okay, they could either be B or C tier. We'll leave it at C tier for now. So that is going to wrap up this video. That is going to be Barbarian, Necromancer, Wizard, Demon Hunter, Crusader, and Monk, all in that order. Let me know what you want me to cover next. What do you want a tier list of next? Please do like and subscribe to this channel, as this was a lot of work. Love you all. See you on the next video.